Okay, so you know how we asked for some in-depth stuff to really dig into? Well, you definitely delivered this time.
You guys weren't kidding.
Not at all. We got this AI audit checklist from Cameron Iqbal over at CTC Global. And let me tell you, it is comprehensive. Like, whoa,
Definitely not a quick skim through kind of document.
no way. So today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into this checklist. It's going to be your ultimate guide, folks, to making sure that all those impressive AI systems out there are not just powerful, but they're also playing by the rules, governed well.
Absolutely. And we're not just going to scratch the surface here. We're talking a systematic breakdown of all the critical components of this checklist. It's designed for the pros in the AI auditing field, and it goes through step by step what to examine to make sure those AI systems are actually meeting those crucial standards. Governance, ethics, security, the whole nine yards.
That's right. And we're going to walk you through it all. Each major section, step by step, highlighting those key questions in the checklist and how you would actually go about checking if things are compliant in each area. Practical, hands-on understanding of what a truly thorough AI audit looks like. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So, first up, we've got AI governance and compliance. That's a biggie. And right off the bat, under AI governance policies, the checklist throws this question at you. Does the organization have a documented AI governance framework? Now, beyond just having a document, what are we really looking for here?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's not just about checking a box. Yep, there's a document. We need to see a genuine commitment to actually managing AI strategically. Ideally, that documented framework should include, formal policies that really lay out those principles, those guidelines for how they're developing and deploying AI.
Makes sense.
And then beyond that, you've got to look at those roles and responsibilities. Who is accountable for what when it comes to AI in that organization? Are there procedures, like set-in-stone procedures, for making decisions about AI projects? It's got to be real.
Right, because a policy that just sits on a shelf isn't really doing much.
Exactly. When you're checking for compliance, you want to see not just the document, but proof that it's being used. Are they actually walking the walk?
Show me the receipts, basically. So building on that, the next question asks, are AI risk management processes aligned with ISO from 2001, NIST AI RMF, and GDPR? Now, these are pretty heavy-hitting frameworks. So how do we move past a simple yes or no and really understand if they're aligned?
It's about getting past surface-level stuff and really digging into whether they've integrated the principles of these frameworks into their actual day-to-day operations.
Not just a checklist, but real action.
Right. You've got ISO 42001, which gives you this whole management system for AI, NIST's RMF, which gives you a structured way to manage those AI risks, and then GDPR, which, well, that's all about data privacy, and that impacts AI in a huge way.
Huge.
So when you're auditing, you want to look for those risk management process documents. Do they actually reference these standards specifically? Can they demonstrate, like with real examples, how their process for identifying, assessing, and mitigating AI risks is really informed by the guidelines in these frameworks?
Right. It's got to be more than just saying, oh, yeah, we follow that. It's showing how they're actually applying it. So moving on, there's this question. Is there an AI ethics committee overseeing AI governance? Now, that sounds pretty important for accountability. How do we make sure this isn't just some committee on paper?
This is where you're looking for that dedicated group, the one tasked with really guiding the ethical considerations around their whole AI strategy.
The ethics police, sort of.
In a way. But to make sure they're actually effective, you want to go beyond just seeing a list of names. Is there a formal charter? Something outlining their purpose, what they can and can't do, how much authority they actually have. Then you look at records of their activities, meeting minutes, showing that they're actually discussing and making decisions related to AI projects. And critically, where do they fit in the organization? Who do they report to? Can they actually influence how AI is developed and used?
I need some teeth, basically.
Right. A truly effective committee, they're going to have real influence, and it's going to be documented.
All right, let's move into regulatory compliance. And right away, we get a broad one. Does the AI system comply with GDPR, ISO 42001, CCPA, or sector-specific regulations? I mean, that's a lot to unpack. Where do you even begin?
Yeah, this is where you really have to dive deep into their legal and compliance documentation. You want to see if they've done specific legal assessments of their AI systems against these regulations. Are there reports from legal or compliance teams that directly address these points?
So basically, show me the paperwork.
Exactly. And when it comes to sector-specific rules, like in finance or healthcare, you need to see proof that they're meeting those very specific requirements.
Makes sense. The next question gets a little more specific. Are AI data processing activities documented and legally justified? Now, this feels like it gets to the heart of a lot of data privacy regs.
Absolutely. This goes right to the core of those data privacy regulations. We're talking about things like data minimization and whether they're processing data lawfully. You need to go through their data processing policies with a fine-tooth comb. What data are they using to train and run this AI? What's the legal basis for using this data under the regulations? Do they have those data flow diagrams, the ones showing how the data moves through the system? What about logs that record all the data processing activities? Every single step of how they handle data needs to be clear and have a solid legal justification. No loose ends.
Gotcha. And the last question under regulatory compliance asks, are AI models designed to ensure transparency, explainability, and accountability? These are biggies, right?
Yeah.
So how do we actually assess if these are baked into the design?
You're right. Those are crucial. Here, you're going to be looking at the architecture of the system and their whole development process. Is their documentation clear? Does it actually explain how the model works, at least for someone who understands the technical stuff? Are there mechanisms built in to actually provide explanations for the model's outputs? And this is a big one. Is it crystal clear who's responsible, who's accountable if the model messes up or causes harm?
Right, because AI gone wrong can be a big problem.
Absolutely. This might involve going through technical specifications, looking for explainability tools, and even understanding how the teams responsible for development and deployment are structured. It's about looking under the hood.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about AI risk management and auditing. The first question here is there a risk assessment framework for AI deployment? We've touched on risk already, but this is specifically about deployment. What makes a good deployment risk framework stand out?
Well, general risk frameworks are important, of course, but when you're specifically looking at AI deployment, the framework should really zoom in on the unique risks that pop up when you're actually putting these AI systems to work in the real world.
Because deploying it is a whole other ballgame.
Exactly. So think about the methodologies they use. What specific types of risks are they even considering? Are they thinking about potential integration issues, like technical hiccups when the AI interacts with existing systems? What about unexpected behavior from the model once it's live? Or even, the potential negative impacts on users, especially if something goes wrong. You want to see reports from past deployment risk assessments that really lay out how they identified and analyzed these risks. And crucially, what steps did they take to mitigate those risks?
All before they hit that go button. Okay, next question. Are AI risks monitored and reported regularly? This seems like it's all about staying vigilant. So what kind of evidence shows that they're really on top of this continuous monitoring?
Absolutely. Managing risk isn't a one-time thing,
Yeah.
It's ongoing.
Right.
So are there dashboards that track those key risk indicators for the AI system? Remember, this is in its live environment now, not just in a testing lab. Are they producing regular risk reports and sharing those reports with the right people within the organization?
Keeping everyone in the loop.
Precisely. And the frequency, the level of detail in those reports, and what they do based on what those reports tell them, those are the real indicators of how seriously they're taking risk management.
Got it. So the last question in this section is pretty straightforward. Does the organization have a formal AI audit plan? I mean, this is getting to the heart of what we're talking about today. So what are the must-haves for a solid AI audit plan?
You're right. This is the core of it. A formal AI audit plan. It should lay out the game plan, the strategy for how and when they're going to independently assess their AI systems. So you want to see those audit policies. What's the scope of these audits? How often are they happening? Who's doing them? And are there clear step-by-step procedures for the whole audit process, including things like how auditors get access to data and the people they need to talk to? And this is really important, what happens with those audit findings? Is there a process for addressing them and tracking them until they're resolved? You want to see a plan in action. Are there upcoming audits scheduled? What about reports from audits they've already completed?
Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of bias and fairness. The next section is all about AI bias detection and fairness auditing, which, let's be honest, is a huge deal for responsible AI. Under AI training data bias assessment, the first question is AI training data diverse and representative of different demographics? This feels like a tough one to verify. So how do you as an auditor even approach this?
It definitely can be complex, but there are ways to get a handle on it. First things first, you want to look at the documentation about those data sets used for training. What do they actually know about the makeup of this data? We're talking demographics,
Yeah.
age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, all of that. Where did they get this data from in the first place?
Yeah.
Were there any known limitations or biases when the data was initially collected?
Because that could affect everything.
Exactly. You might also ask for statistical summaries of the data. And did they do anything to make sure different groups are represented? Understanding how they put that data together is key. It's like figuring out the ingredients of a recipe. If you're missing key ingredients, the dish won't turn out right.
Great analogy. So then the next question asks, has the AI model been tested for racial, gender, or socioeconomic biases? Now, this is where we move from the data itself to how the model actually behaves. What are we hoping to see here?
You want to see those bias testing reports. And not just any reports. They've got to have the details. What methods did they use for the testing? What metrics did they use to look for bias across those different demographic groups? And what were the results? Did they find any biases that were statistically significant? And if they did, what did they do about it? You want to see specific examples and hard numbers, not just general statements.
Right, show me the math. So following that, there's this. Are fairness metrics such as equalized odds, disparate impact, and statistical parity applied? Okay, now these are getting into some technical terms. So what does it really mean to check if they're applying these in a way that matters?
What you're looking for here is that they're not just doing these calculations, but actually using them to make decisions about how they develop and use the model. Do they have thresholds for what's acceptable in terms of disparity based on these metrics? Are they tracking and analyzing those results over time? This is key. What do they do when those metrics are flashing red, saying there might be unfairness? You want to see those metrics woven into their whole strategy for assessing and mitigating bias. They should be using the data to drive better decisions.
So it's not just about checking the box, yep, we calculated those metrics. It's about using them to make the AI fairer.
Precisely. It's about action, not just calculation.
Okay, the last question in the section focuses on proactive steps. Are data pre-processing techniques used to remove historical biases? Can you give us some examples of these techniques, and how would we know if they're really using them?
Sure. So you've got techniques like data balancing. That's basically adjusting how different groups are represented in the training data. Then there's reweighting, which is like assigning different levels of importance to data points from groups that are underrepresented. And then you've got more advanced stuff, like adversarial debiasing, which aims to make the model less able to predict sensitive attributes. To make sure they're actually doing this stuff, you want to look at the documentation for their data pre-processing pipeline. Do they describe the specific techniques they're using? Is there any data or analysis showing how well these techniques actually work in reducing bias? What algorithms are they using and what parameters are they setting? It's all about the details.
So we're getting into the weeds here. It's not just about good intentions, it's about showing the work.
Exactly.
Okay, next up is AI model fairness and transparency. And the first question echoes a point we've already talked about. Does the AI model undergo regular bias audits and fairness testing? Why is this repeated emphasis important?
Well, it's like this. Fairness isn't a one-and-done thing. It's not like you check it once and you're good to go. Bias can creep in or even reappear as the model learns from new data or as the data in the real world changes. That's why those regular audits and testing are so important. And when you're auditing, you want to see that they have a schedule for these activities, detailed reports from every single audit, and proof that they're actually looking at the findings and taking action. The more often they do it and the more thorough they are, the more confident you can be that they're committed to fairness. It's like getting regular checkups at the doctor. It helps you catch potential problems early on.
Makes sense. So building on that, we've got this. Are fairness results documented and reviewed by compliance teams? This is about connecting those technical assessments to the folks who are responsible for making sure things are on the up and up. What should we be looking for in terms of how they document and review this stuff?
Right, because it's not enough for just the data science team to do these tests and then, file them away. Those results, along with clear explanations of what they found and any red flags, need to be documented formally and shared with the teams responsible for regulatory compliance and making sure they meet those ethical standards.
Right, everyone needs to be on the same page.
Exactly. You want to see evidence that compliance teams are actively involved in reviewing those reports, that they really understand what the fairness metrics mean, and that there are processes in place for them to weigh in and track any needed course correction. It's all about collaboration and communication.
Okay, next up. Does AI have explainability tools, SHAP Lime, to clarify decisions? Now, we touched on these earlier. Why are they especially important when we're talking about fairness audits?
These tools are like your X-ray vision into the AI's decision-making. They let you dissect those individual predictions and really see how different features contribute to the outcome. For example, SHAP values. They can show you how each feature is pushing the prediction in one direction or another for a specific case.
So it's not just a black box anymore.
Right. And this level of detail is crucial for spotting those hidden biases that might not be obvious if you're just looking at things overall. You want to see if they've implemented these tools and if they're actually using them to investigate those potentially unfair outcomes for different demographic groups.
Got it. So the last question in this section asks, is AI fairness validated using external tools like IBM AI Fairness 360, FairLearn? What's so important about using external tools, especially ones that are independent?
Think of it this way. External tools often bring standardized metrics and algorithms to the table. They're like those unbiased referees in a game. And they usually come with these comprehensive frameworks specifically designed for fairness assessment. So using them can add a layer of objectivity and rigor to the whole validation process. And they might even uncover biases that those internal tools or methods might miss.
They bring a fresh perspective.
Exactly. So when you're auditing, find out if they're using these external tools. Look at the reports they generate and see how they're factoring in those findings into their overall fairness strategy.
Got it. All right, moving on to AI decision review and human oversight. The first question gets right to the point. Are AI-generated decisions audited for fairness before deployment? This seems like a crucial step, especially in high-stakes applications. So what does a good pre-deployment audit look like in practice?
You're absolutely right. This is crucial. So before they launch that AI system into the wild, you want to see a thorough examination of its decision-making process, looking specifically for those potential biases and unfair outcomes across different groups. Check those audit logs, those pre-deployment validation reports, and make sure they've done that fairness testing. And then look for the sign-off procedures. Is there a process where someone has to confirm that the audit was conducted and those findings were addressed before they hit that go live button? You want to see clear evidence that they have specific fairness criteria and they're checking those off one by one. It's like a final inspection before a building is open to the public.
Makes sense. So the next question asks, is there a human-in-the-loop process to monitor AI decisions? This whole idea of human oversight, it seems super important when we're talking about fairness. So how do you audit to make sure this process is actually working?
Right, because humans are still a critical part of the loop, especially when it comes to something as nuanced as fairness. So to audit this effectively, you really need to understand those specific workflows, the criteria they use for deciding when a human needs to step in and review a decision made by the AI. What kinds of situations trigger that human review? What information are they giving to the human reviewers so they can make a good judgment call? This is important. Are there clear guidelines for how that human reviewer should evaluate the AI's decision, particularly when it comes to fairness? You want to look at records of past human interventions too. Why did they have to step in? What was the outcome? This can tell you a lot about how well the process is working.
So it's not just about having a human somewhere in the process. It's about making sure that human oversight is actually effective.
Precisely. It's about quality control, making sure things are running as they should.
Okay, and then we have the last question in this section. Are users given the ability to challenge AI decisions in high-risk applications? For example, hiring, lending, law enforcement. This is about making sure individuals have recourse if they feel they've been treated unfairly by an AI. What should a robust challenge process include?
You want that process to be crystal clear, easy for users to understand, and transparent. So check if they have documented procedures explaining how a user can challenge a decision. What information do they have to provide? How long does it take to get a response? Who's responsible for reviewing these challenges? What criteria are they using? And importantly, is there a clear path for resolution? How do they communicate the outcome back to the user? To see how well this is working in practice, you want to review records of past challenges and how they were resolved. Are they taking these challenges seriously? Are they handling them fairly? That's what you're looking for.
Right. It's all about making sure that individuals have a voice if they feel an AI system has made a mistake.
Absolutely. Fairness and transparency go hand in hand.
Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about security. The next section is AI security and adversarial attack protection. This is where we really focus on the resilience and safety of those AI systems themselves. And the first question under AI Model Security and Access Controls asks, are AI models protected with role-based access control, RBAC? Now, how do you go about auditing the implementation of RBAC for these AI models?
Okay, so RBAC, that's all about making sure only the right people have access to the right things. So when you're auditing, you're going to be looking at those access control policies and how they're actually set up in the system. Are there specific roles defined? Like, okay, these people can only view the model, but these other folks can actually make changes? Are users assigned to those roles based on their actual job responsibilities? And are they following that least privilege principle, which means users only have the access they absolutely need to do their jobs, nothing more? And then you want to dig into those system logs. Are they tracking who's trying to access the models? Are they making sure it's only authorized users getting in? It's like checking the security system at a high security facility. You want to make sure the right protocols are in place and they're actually being followed.
Makes sense. Okay, next question. Does the AI system require multi-factor authentication, MFA, for access? Now, that's pretty standard security practice these days, so how do we confirm that it's really implemented?
It's become the norm for good reason. To confirm MFA is in place, you need to look at the authentication setup of the AI system. Is MFA enabled for everyone who needs access, especially those with more powerful roles? What types of authentication factors are they using? Is it just a password, or are they adding an extra layer of security, like a code from an app or even biometrics? Then look at those system logs again. Are they recording successful and failed logins, including whether they used MFA? You might even try to log in yourself, just to test if that MFA is really being enforced.
Smart. So then the checklist asks, are AI models encrypted at rest and in transit? FIRG AES 256, TLS 1.3. Now, this is about protecting the confidentiality of the models and the data they use. What are the key things to focus on when auditing encryption?
Right? You don't want those models or the data they're working with just floating around unprotected. So for encryption at rest, meaning when the data is just sitting there, you want to check their policies. Are they using strong encryption algorithms like AES 256 for those storage systems, things like databases or file systems where the models are kept? And what about key management? How are those encryption keys generated, stored, and accessed? That's critical. And then for encryption in transit, meaning when data is moving around, like when it's being sent over a network, you want to make sure they're using secure protocols like TLS 1.3 for any communication involving those AI models, like when someone's accessing them through an API or when they're updating the model. You can usually find evidence of this in their network configuration logs and those security certificates. It's like making sure that any sensitive information is being transported in a locked briefcase, not just left out in the open.
Great analogy. And the last question in this section is about vigilance. Is there logging and monitoring of AI access attempts? Why is this so important for security, and what should we be looking for when we examine those logs?
Those logs are like your security camera footage. They can tell you who's been trying to get into the system and what they were trying to do. So comprehensive logging and monitoring of those access attempts, that's crucial. It can help you spot suspicious activity, like someone trying to break in, or even someone who has access but is trying to do something they shouldn't.
Insider threats.
Exactly. And if there is a security incident, those logs are going to be essential for figuring out what happened. So when you're looking at them, you want details. Timestamps, who the user was, the specific AI models they were trying to access, what actions they performed, and where did that access originate? And are those logs being kept for long enough? Do they have systems that flag unusual or unauthorized access patterns and alert the security team right away?
So it's not just about recording, it's about making sure someone is actually watching those recordings and taking action when they see something suspicious.
Exactly. You need both for a robust security posture.
Okay, let's get into the really cutting-edge stuff now. The next section is adversarial attack and AI model tampering protection. And the first question is a big one. Are AI models tested against adversarial attacks? Evasion, poisoning, model inversion, etc. This is a whole new world of threats, right? So what should an auditor be looking for when they're reviewing those testing reports?
You're absolutely right. Adversarial attacks, those are a whole different ballgame. So those reports, they need to lay out the specific types of attacks they simulated. We're talking evasion attacks where someone tries to trick the model with sneaky altered inputs. Poisoning attacks where they try to mess with the training data itself. Model inversion attacks where they're trying to steal sensitive information from the model, things like that.
It sounds like a spy movie.
It kind of is. So the report should explain the methods they used, the tools they used, and then critically, the results. How vulnerable was the model to each type of attack? And did they assess the potential damage if an attack was successful? What recommendations did they make to make that model more robust, harder to break?
So they need to show they're not just thinking about the attacks, they're thinking about how to defend against them.
Precisely. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Okay, next up. Are AI training data sets protected against data poisoning attacks? We've talked about data integrity before, but this is about deliberately messing with the data, right? What security measures are we talking about here?
You're right. This is about protecting against malicious tampering. So think about access controls. Can just anyone change the training data? Or do they have tight restrictions in place, making sure only authorized people can make modifications? Do they have procedures for validating data? That's about being able to spot those weird or suspicious data points that might have been snuck in.
Right, like those bad apples.
Exactly. And then do they have any anomaly detection mechanisms? Those can flag any unusual changes in the data that might be a sign of someone trying to poison it. And version control is huge. Do they keep backups of clean data so they can restore it if something happens?
It's like having a safety net for your data.
Precisely. You always want to be prepared for the worst case scenario.
Okay, now the checklist gets even more specific. Has AI undergone penetration testing using adversarial AI security tools? For example, Microsoft Counterfeit, Cleverons. They're actually naming specific tools here. So what's the value of using those for penetration testing?
Those tools, they're like specialized weapons in the fight against adversarial attacks. They're designed specifically to automate and streamline testing those AI systems for vulnerabilities. They come with pre-built attack algorithms and frameworks that can systematically probe the model's defenses, looking for weak spots. So a penetration test that uses those tools should give you a more thorough and standardized assessment of how secure that AI system is against those very specific threats.
It's like bringing in the elite forces.
Exactly. You want the best of the best on your side when you're dealing with this kind of stuff.
Okay, and the last question in this section is AI output monitored for unexpected behavior caused by adversarial inputs? This is about catching those attacks in real time by watching how the model behaves. So what kind of anomalies might be a sign that something fishy is going on?
It's like watching for those telltale signs of a break-in. So you want to establish what normal behavior looks like for the model, and then you're looking for anything that deviates from that. Maybe there's a sudden drop in accuracy, or the model starts spitting out weird predictions that don't make sense, or maybe it starts classifying things in ways it shouldn't. Those could all be signs of an adversarial attack. So you want to check those monitoring systems, see what metrics they're tracking, and make sure they have alerts set up for any suspicious activity. And just as important, how are they investigating those anomalies? Do they have a process in place to figure out what's causing them and take action?
So again, it's about being proactive and having a plan in place.
Absolutely. Security is all about being one step ahead of the bad guys.
Okay, let's move on to AI, API, and cloud security measures. Now, with so many AI systems running in the cloud and using APIs, this area is critical. So the first question here is, are AI APIs secured with OAuth 2.0 authentication and rate limiting? Why are those specific measures so important for API security?
You're right. APIs are the doorways to these AI systems. So you've got to make sure those doorways are well guarded. Now, OAuth 2.0, that's a widely used authorization framework. It lets people access those APIs securely without having to share their actual login credentials. That's crucial for protecting those APIs from unauthorized use. It's like giving someone a temporary key card instead of a master key to the building. And then you've got rate limiting, which is about controlling how many requests an API can handle within a certain time frame. This helps prevent those denial of service attacks where someone floods the API with requests and overloads the system. It's like a bouncer at a club, making sure things don't get too crowded. So when you're auditing, you want to check that API documentation in those configuration settings to make sure OAuth 2.0 is in place for authentication and that they've set appropriate rate limits.
Got it. So next question, does AI use API monitoring and anomaly detection to prevent unauthorized queries? Now this is about being proactive, right? What kinds of anomalies might be a red flag for unauthorized activity?
Exactly. You want to catch those bad guys before they can do any damage. So, API monitoring and anomaly detection systems, they can pick up on unusual patterns in the API traffic, those things that might point to someone trying to get in where they don't belong or maybe trying to do something malicious. Think about it like this. You suddenly see a huge spike in requests coming from an IP address you've never seen before, or someone's trying to access parts of the API that are off limits, or they're sending requests that are just formatted weirdly. Those could all be signs of trouble. So when you're auditing, take a look at those API monitoring dashboards and the logs from the anomaly detection systems. What events are they tracking? Are they set up to send alerts if something fishy is going on?
So it's not just about having the tools, it's about using those tools to actively monitor and respond to potential threats.
Exactly. It's about being vigilant.
Okay, next question. Are AI model weights and datasets secured in cloud environments, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, with encryption and restricted access? With so much of AI happening in the cloud, this is huge. What are some of the cloud-specific security aspects that we need to think about?
Cloud security is its own beast. So in addition to the organization's own security configurations, you've got to look at the controls provided by the cloud provider itself. First things first, make sure those AI model weights and datasets stored in the cloud are encrypted, both when they're sitting there, what we call at rest, and when they're moving around in transit. Cloud providers offer services for that. You've got things like AWS KMS, Azure Key Vault, and Google Cloud KMS. And of course, TLS is still your best friend for data in transit. Then dive into those access control policies. Cloud providers use what they call IAM, Identity and Access Management, and you want to make sure those policies are set up to grant the absolute minimum access necessary, least privilege, remember. And don't forget about those other cloud security services, those firewalls and network segmentation tools. Are they configured properly? Cloud security is multi-layered. You've got to peel back those layers and make sure everything is locked down tight.
Got it. And the final question in this section asks, does AI security comply with ISO 20001, SOC 2, and NIST cybersecurity framework? Now, those are the gold standards for security. So what does it generally mean to be compliant with these frameworks?
Complying with those frameworks means they're serious about security. ISO 20001, that's about establishing, implementing, and constantly improving a comprehensive information security management system. SOC 2 focuses on those key trust principles: security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. And the NIST cybersecurity framework, that gives you a whole set of cybersecurity standards and best practices, kind of like a roadmap for good security hygiene. So to audit this, you're going to be looking at those security policies, procedures, and you want to see audit reports from those accredited bodies that actually assess whether they're meeting the requirements of these frameworks.